Hey guys, VaulSC here, hope that you're doing well. So the patch just landed for September after the happy hour for Conquest, the Last Argument of Kings. I've taken the time to read through the PDF once, that's the summary update, and I've had a look through the Weaver Court's rules. So this video is just to give you my first glance, first reaction, knee-jerk sort of stuff, and hopefully we'll have time to do a bit of playtest. I've got a lot of time off work at the moment, so we're going to do a lot of playtesting of the new rules with Weaver Courts and the updated factions. Overall, the TLDR is that they've made some good changes. Overall, the patch is a win. They've actually managed to nerf Sorcerer Kings and Uroni a little bit. They haven't gone far enough, in my opinion, but I've always been calling for an approach where you do a light pass. I just would prefer those light passes to happen more frequently. It is a bit disappointing that they're still not ready to drop a lot of updates for some of the factions like Wadroon and Nords and Dwergum and Spires. Those factions in particular need a lot of love at the moment in terms of revising things. But it's good to see some handling of 100 Kingdoms and what was the other one? City-States especially got some good changes there. So let's go through and do a bit of a breakdown of what we have seen, and then we can talk about it a little bit more comprehensively as things pan out later. Overall, though, in this patch notes here, the core changes I am really loving. So fluid formation has been nerfed. You have to start and end with 3 stands in the front row, which prevents the situation where you simply pivot your regiment so the corner of it is closer to the enemy regiment, because the charge distance is just measured to closest point, and that was being used to really get a lot of advantage in terms of alpha strikes. So I think this will hurt Uroni a little bit, given that they have a really easy way to get fluid formation. It does damage 100 Kingdoms a little bit in terms of the Imperial Officer supremacy, although the Imperial Officer wasn't doing great. He has been buffed a little bit, we'll get to that later. The Strategos for Old Dominion, as far as I can recall, can't do that anymore anyway, so that's not too big of a deal. But overall, I think it's a good change. I mean, I think it does nerf some regiments, like I think Sealed Temple, for example, are even worse than they were before. But they needed to do it. I felt like fluid formation was just too much, and really the cool thing about it that it intended to do, as they've mentioned in the design notes right here, is just to have it be able to spin around and have a new charge target without wasting an action on the reform. But it wasn't really being used that way, but it's still a really good ability, in my opinion. It's just worth having. I just wouldn't go out of my way to get it. I wouldn't pay points for it, for example. Fire in advance stops you from shooting and then moving backwards. I think that's fine. We weren't seeing a lot of fire in advance stuff in the game at the moment. I remember fire in advance being a bit nasty back in the day when the Predator was doing that quite a lot with slingers and little just moves like that, I guess. But yeah, I mean, with the word advance in there, as per their design notes, they're trying to go for an idea of, shooting and moving towards your enemy. So this is a little bit of a nerf to that particular ability. The supremacy phase has been reverted back, which is great. I was kind of in the camp that was calling for this. I don't know why they changed it in the first place, but what we've got now is, rather than sort of jockeying for position in terms of the early game, trying to be the loser of the roll until around about turn 3 or 4, where you want to win it, it's always done based on command card. So this does give a little bit back to players that weren't, willing to run, 15 activation lists. It does hurt 100 Kingdoms a little bit because they were the best at it, at having a massive, huge stack and Nords as well. But I think that's fine. I mean, I want people to be able to build a list that has like 11 activations in it and still feel like they have a good chance against the meta, whereas everybody else was going like 13 plus cards. So this is a good change in my opinion. Lethal Demise. What was happening recently is the Uroni regiment, the Origami Warriors, were stacking up in these massive regiments that had a ton of wounds. They were being healed by the Spider Queen, and Lethal Demise was just a little bit too overpowered. So they've changed it around. I hope that obviously Spires bounce back, because Spires have been taking hit after hit after hit. But Lethal Demise is more of an afterthought now. It's not like a super serious mechanic that sort of is meta-defining in some cases. I don't know if it ever was actually in the most recent patch, but I think that this change is fine. Lethal Demise is a very annoying rule, so you kind of want to keep it under control. Obscuring. So this, I didn't even realize it until recently, but apparently if you have a monster like a Tauntaur sitting in a forest, it counts as obscured because it's sitting in the forest, whereas what they're saying now is that the size of the regiment matters relative to the size of the zonal terrain. The good thing about this change is that players can still somewhat control it by just simply agreeing how big the forests are. So if you have a really wonderful 3D terrain forest that looks really huge and it would contain a Tauntaur in it, you and your opponent can agree to play it as a size infinity or size 5 forest. But mostly, I believe forests are being played as around about size 2, which means you can see over them to a size 3 or 4 creature. And what they're saying now is that if that size 3 or 4 monster is in the forest, it can be seen without being obscured, which just makes sense, to be honest. Great changes so far. Now there's special rules explanation here, so this is just clarifying really the idea that if you are cleave 1 in brackets and you have something else that gives you cleave 1 in brackets, it doesn't actually make you to cleave 2. But if you are cleave 1 in brackets and get cleave +1, then you would go up to cleave 2, which is kind of intuitive. It's a good additive kind of explanation, and there's a lot going on in there. I think this affects Wadroon. We'll come to their changes later, but from memory, I think if you have a cleave 1 regiment, and they get the chant that gives them +1 cleave, that will take them to cleave 2, which just makes sense. So you kind of want the game to play intuitively like that. The draw events explanation, this is not massive. I think there are a few niche things in the game where you are adding a value from draw eventing and getting +1, whatever it might be, +1 defense or evasion or something like that, where you want to add it together. So this gives you a bit more wording around that. Not a hugely impactful one. Fly and zonal terrain. So this is interesting. This is quite cool because there's a lot of new fly regiments coming in with Weavers. They are a very flappy faction. So a regiment marching or charging over zonal terrain is not affected by the piece of zonal terrain unless it started or ended the actions within it, which is great. So you can fly over it without being affected by hindering, for example. That is pretty important, I think, if you are something like a Terraphon or whatever it might be, or a Quattle. I think Quattles ignore the hindering anyway, but the idea is that you can completely ignore the forest by starting and ending, with a complete sort of parabola over top of the trees, if you know what I mean. So supremacies, they're just further clarifying the always active type thing, battlefield versus activated. I remember some people asking me during games, how this worked, and I agreed that the rules weren't very well spelt out, but this does help a little bit. So always active is the most annoying version of this, where you just get the ability on everything, regardless of where the warlord is or whether he's alive, which is kind of annoying. I don't really love the always active ones, although it makes more sense if it's kind of like the Imperial Officer, where he grants, the army some abilities like Vanguard or whatever it might be, where the idea of the ability is your warlord giving the troops some sort of guidance before the battle, like a battle plan, and that's where always active seems to make sense to me. Battlefield, you need the character to be there, so that's a little bit more spelt out, and activated is where you pick it at the end of the supremacy phase. I think that they should be trying to redesign supremacy abilities so that all characters, or at least most characters, have a combination of these. I think that the best designed abilities are the ones where you have a passive on the battlefield ability, which can be lost if your character dies, and a moderately weak activated supremacy ability, which is once per battle. Those are the ones that I find the most appealing. Okay, 100 Kingdoms. Most of the characters coming down in points, which is great. They have not touched the Theist or the Sorcerer, so the Mage, which is fine. Those are both great characters. This frees up a ton of points. So if you're playing an army list which contains a couple of noble lords and an imperial officer, you just saved 30 points right there, which is much needed. And it does really help the mounted noble lord because he wasn't seeing much play towards the end of it. I think that's fantastic. With the imperial officer getting bodyguard, that's not a big deal, except for the fact that they're going to be bringing in some changes to Dweghom soon, where duels are going to start to matter quite a lot more. So having that type of thing is helpful. The imperial officer hasn't been doing great lately. I feel like what they should have done is to play around with his battlefield orders a bit more. I would have liked to have seen him exchange one of his less useful battlefield orders for something that gives double time or something similar to it. That would have been really cool. The advanced infantry training, so no more having to take veteran to get the +1 support, so that's fine. People were wrangling it, so they got veteran on their larger blocks anyway, so that's not a huge change. Tenacious 2 going away, becoming Tenacious 1 for most things in the game that can have it. So Sorcerer Kings, the spell Tenacious 2 down to Tenacious 1, some of the only changes. This has been heavily asked for by the player base. Just a lot of people saying Tenacious 2 was too oppressive, so the fact that the Squires lose that is fine. I don't think I'll be taking Squires as much this particular patch, but they're still decent. Then Men-at-Arms, okay, so you don't have to be veteran to get support 2, that's great. Archangel, minus 20 points. The interesting thing about this wording here is that they are suggesting that applies to both versions of the Archangel, and then they're giving the buff there to the sword version of the Archangel, which nobody was taking. I think that because they haven't specified that it's only the Flames of Vengeance version that's coming down on the points, I'll still be taking the Shield Archangel. If they update Army Builder and make it so the shield version stays the same points and drops the other one by 20, then I would consider it. But if it's just a global minus 20 across both of them, the shield version is still the better version for the +1 defense. Crimson Tower and Seal Temple both get Fearless. This is a small buff. It doesn't make them any more or less viable. What was happening at the end of this last patch is that people were taking a lot of Seal Temple and Crimson Tower purely to help deal with Sorcerer Kings and Euroni. I think this is fine. I mean, I think there are other things you should have done to change these regiments. I don't think Fearless is the thing that fixes them, but it moves them in a better direction. Like, they weren't powerful enough. Now they are slightly more powerful. That's fine. Ashen Dawn, minus 20 points. This is just sensible. Like, hats off to PB for understanding that when they nerfed Ashen Dawn a while back and then made everybody else's factions really powerful, it is a net reduction to Ashen Dawn, bringing them below the waterline. So the minus 20 points here just makes sense. They're an excellent regiment. I will definitely be running one minimum, obviously it has to be a minimum unit of Ashen Dawn, but you will see me playing one single regiment of Ashen Dawn in a lot of 100 Kingdoms lists. I think the way to go, I know people don't like the Order of the Shield, but I'll probably run Order of the Shield with Militia or Men-at-Arms and then one unit of Ashen Dawn. I don't own any Sealed Temple, so I might play some games where it's like one Crimson Tower and one Ashen Dawn, but the problem with that is that you don't bring both heavies in at the same time, so yeah, that is generally the problem with Ashen Dawn, less so the points, but it's great that they have a points reduction there, which is awesome. Sakurai, Bodyguard and Oblivious is helpful. I don't know if that makes them good enough. They were already pretty good against resolve checks, but that at least gives you more of a reason to take them, so that's that's a thumbs up. It's better that they buffed them than nerfed them, let me put it that way. And then after all of those 100 Kingdoms buffs, we have the big nerf, which is goodbye to light scoring, which is a good thing for the health of the game. Like, it needed to happen. It's just a shame that 100 Kingdoms have been so heavily hit by this. It was awesome that you could sort of plan around this and build your regiments in this way. It makes me less interested in playing the Imperial Officer in a regiment of crossbows or Imperial Rangers, for example. So this is a bit of a shame. I don't think you'll be seeing sort of the massively spammy light regiment lists anymore, and the idea of taking the Water Mage is kind of out the window for me now, because one of the appeals of the Water Mage is that she can keep your regiment at full strength for scoring. The Fire Mage is going to be the only option for me going forward, I believe. So yeah, this is, I think it's a good update for probably feudal orders, because you're getting some points decreases for the nobles, and your knights are a little bit better. And that kind of playstyle wasn't really reliant on the early game scoring, so there you go. All right, Spires, pretty much no changes. Obviously, due to the way that Lethal Demise works now, they've had to revise the numbers, but obviously Spires are well overdue for a full rework, and that'll apparently be coming soon. Nords similarly haven't been touched, even though they did have a rework a while back. Ulfednar get Lethal Demise 4. That's not going to be good enough to make them a powerful regiment, in my opinion. Captain getting +1 resolve, but apparently losing the light scoring. However, there is going to be another way of doing light scoring, so yeah, a bit of a side grade. Nords, they're in a reasonable place. I think that the main thing that's helped Nords at the moment is the nerfs that are coming for Euroni and Sorcerer Kings. Those two things in particular are what makes Nords a lot more viable than they were before. And they were already pretty viable, I must say. Now, with Drune, so they're not touching the Chosen of Death Tenacious 2, which is a bit weird. They are changing Kiss the Dinosaur so that you can't, put your Scion of Conquest on top of a drum beast and hit people with spells from a billion miles away and make them re-roll their morale and defense save. So that's a bit of a nerf to that was called for. Quaddles becoming more expensive, so you're seeing these photographs of people taking like 60 quaddles in their carry case to tournaments. So that will hurt people that are just going to spam them, which is fair enough. I mean, they're really good. So yeah, it's just demoralizing seeing that many quaddles on the board. It's probably a bad experience for some newer players as well. So it's what it is. Cult of War getting +1 cleave. I think that's great. It makes Cult of War probably the best cult. People were taking a lot of Cult of Death, and Deadly Blades is good, but there's so much stuff in the game that can reroll 6s, so that's kind of painful. And the Apex Predator was already using Deadly Blades, so +1 cleave is a bit more useful. It changes the Apex from cleave 2 to cleave 3. And just about every regiment, that can benefit from cleave +1. So I think we're going full circle, and we're going back to Cult of War and everything, most likely. Now, the new Queen Supremacy. So this one's interesting. It gives you the opportunity to play your first card and then basically bounce into another activation, which is powerful. I don't know if it's powerful enough that you would take this over top of the Chief, who's still, like, both versions of the Chief are still probably the way to go. If you're running Speakers, you take the Thunder Chief all the time, and if you're not, you're running the Foot Chief all the time for the various things that he does. Remember how the Spire's High Executor, whatever he's called, can activate 3 things at the beginning of his turn, and on paper that looks good, but nobody plays that character because the High Clone Executor doesn't really see play because it's just not a very strong ability. And I suspect this will be similar, where you don't really care about the always active rallying all the time, and you don't care about the activating 2 regiments once per game. So I think that the Wadrone players will stick with the Chiefs. Chosen of Death, just a bit of a correction there with the Standard Bearer. So overall, this is not really the way to fix Wadrone. I can understand Wadrone players feeling a bit let down by this because the faction overall just isn't as enjoyable to play as it once was back in the day, where keeping track of your chant tokens was really a critical thing with the way that you sort of build up chant tokens and have something that can be really impactful in terms of like Conquest and so forth. The way I'm not really explaining this well. The thing that I would do with Wadrone is that I would increase the cap of cards you can have the sequence to 4 cards, and I would bring back the idea of having a tiered list of buffs. So there'd be a really hefty buff if you can get 4 cards working, and if you can only get 2 or 3 cards working, you get a little bit out of it. And some regiments would still retain the innate ability of getting an ability triggered if you are chanting. But by doing that, you could, for example, go to Chosen of Death and say, okay, you guys get +1 cleave for every card above the first one that you chant for, or +1 evasion, or whatever it might be. This might not be a great example, but what you would want to do is you give an ability to regiments that can't use the innate chant function. So if your whole army is getting +1 cleave from Cult of War, and you've got some slingers or some hunters that can't really use the +1 cleave, you give them the ability to chant and get something other than +1 cleave. So for example, you get +1 AP if you chant with your slingers, for example, and instead of the +1 cleave. So you want to make sure that there's plenty of stuff generating the chant markers, but plenty of stuff that's spending it as well. You want to have an even healthy balance there, and you want to make more of the masteries and the magic items based around chanting. It's not really as fun if you're playing your entire turn knowing that there's just going to be like 1 or 2 specific things in your army that are going to use the chant, and everything else just banks up the chant tokens and just doesn't really benefit from it. And the whole thing that you are leveraging really in your battle plan is just the powerful supremacy of your warlord and the good stats of everything else. And that's sort of what you're seeing at the moment. Speakers really just go off the massively powerful +1 shock to everything, and just the super speed and the great stats. That's how you play that list. It's not really about getting the chant. The chants hardly matter. And the Foot Chief version, where you go with a lot of minimum small units and slingers and things like that, really just leverage the Chief's innate abilities of Vanguard and Trample and all of that. And the chanting doesn't really matter as much, and that's what needs to be fixed about Wadrone, really. Okay, let's move on to, what have we got? Sorcerer Kings. Okay, Sorcerer Kings recently won the Worlds event. I've been playing them a lot. I won, the most recent TTS event and did well in the ones before that. So what needed to change with Sorcerer Kings is that the Maharaja needed to be nerfed, and it did get nerfed. The Flamecasters needed to be nerfed, and they've been nerfed. The thing is, though, that Sorcerer Kings are really still strong, and the optimal way to play them still is to spam Fire Elementals. Because from what I'm seeing, they haven't actually changed Fire Dominion. They've just given you less benefit of being inflamed. So Fire Dominion's still going to heal wounds back, and it's still going to make your regiments inflamed. It's just not the case that your Flamecasters are going to be able to hit on 1s or 2s anymore. It's just going to mean that they retain rapid volley while are inflamed, which is a good change. But the strategy for Sorcerer Kings is still going to be using Sword Dancers and Flamecasters and Ghouls. You're not going to be having a combined arms approach where you take a lot of Rajakur and some Danaveda Archers and, a Mahout over here and then some Flamecasters. You're just not going to do that. So while I've made some helpful reworks, if I'm playing Sorcerer Kings, my list is not going to be changed very much. And that's sort of the disappointing part. So at least they haven't nerfed them into the ground. At least they've nerfed them somewhat. But there's still more to do, in my opinion. So Conflagration, losing the triple activation, that's important. Firesight giving the triple activation to a Court of Air regiment, that's fine. The Court of Air stuff's not as strong in close combat as the Court of Fire stuff is, in my opinion. Flamecasters have been nerfed correctly, it's good. They can't be affected by homing winds anymore, that's important. Elemental feedback. First time the character casts a spell, two successes. Regiment is currently attached to heals for 2 wounds. So that's affecting the character's regiment, not the regiment it's casting it on. So in most cases it'll be on its own regiment, that's fine. Spell adjustments, yeah, we talked about that. Homing Winds. Searing Sandstorm doesn't give Tenacious 2 anymore, that's good. Molten Blades, it's Cleave 1. I think it used to be Cleave +1. Can't quite remember what that was originally. Spiteful Winds, well, I haven't really been dealing with Court of Fire very much, just because I haven't been dealing with Court of Air so much because Court of Fire has been so strong, and because the Court of Air stuff generally hasn't really been released. Under the elements, this is really just to make sure your character can ride the water elemental thingies. Rajakur, Bodyguard, that's fine, especially with Dwegam coming in with their super dueling. Steelheart's less expensive, great. Raj losing forward force, yep, small nerf, that was needed. And the Mahabharati Sardar. Okay, this is... Oh, that's the character. Yep. So they can take there. So the human character that's not a spellcaster probably still too weak to take, to be honest, because the spells give you more rituals and so on and so forth, and they're generally very, very strong. Okay, yeah, so again, the conclusion is that Sorcerer King's still too powerful, but the game is in a much more playable state now that they've received these nerfs. So I do take my hat off to Parabellum for making these changes. If I am playing in an upcoming tournament, if I care about doing well in the tournament, I'll be playing Sorcerer Kings. I know Euroni is still very strong as well, and Weaver Courts. We'll get to Weaver Courts later. They have they're the newest faction, right? So in true Parabellum tradition, the newest faction starts out the weakest, and then they usually overbuff them after they've been to a couple of events. So that's how I feel about Weaver Courts as well. So Euroni, Tenacious 2 going away from Damaru's, that was critically needed. Origami's, again, the Lethal Demise has been changed. The Bane of Deeds, okay, becomes scaling. That's a spell, I think. The Spider Queens are less expensive, even though they were really strong. And the way they're justifying that is they're making the spells scaling. And the thought is that, and I wasn't really there for it, but apparently a lot of people are playing the large blocks of Origami Warriors and casting the spells on those guys, and that's what was oppressive. That's what I'm hearing from the whole Euroni bit. So they've weakened that by making the spell scaling, but they've sort of added some other buffs there to sort of bring them back up again. It seems to me like they're still pretty good. The Powerful Presence, no light scoring, okay, that's critical. Although, having said that, I felt like Euroni players were still putting their big characters with the tough units as opposed to just jamming them in a regiment of Damarus, from what I was seeing. That's what I would have done, but people weren't really doing it. And just reducing the value of Tenacious there as well. Shikigami unreleased yet, and Dai Yokai a little bit more maneuverable. I feel like Euroni just haven't really been hit by the nerf bat hard enough here, which is disappointing. I feel like we're still going to see for the next while Sorcerer Kings and Euroni doing really, really well. And given that Euroni haven't been nerfed as much as Sorcerer Kings, maybe Euroni are just purely the number one faction right now by a big margin. City-States have had tons of buffs. Strategic Stack has had a few little rewords. I think they're really going for the idea that you're just getting more and more buffs from activating stuff from the Strategic Stack, which is really, really good. They're really trying to make that more critical to the identity of City-States. And entouraging something makes it count as being activated from the strategic stack, which is awesome because there are a lot of rules which you can take in the City-States army list that say you get this awesome bonus if it comes from the strategic stack, but obviously you can't activate everything from the strategic stack, but this gives you more ways of triggering those abilities, which is great. Aristarch has been reworked a little bit, so the battlefield order can affect all friendly regiments when you activate it once per game. And the battlefield part is reroll all failed reinforcement rolls. That's huge. Bear in mind that the chariots lost flank, but this means that on turn 2, because City-States take so many mediums, and given that they're killing all of the light scoring, you're going to be seeing City-States players roll up with like 12 to 13 medium regiments in some cases, and the Aristarch is going to probably be the only warlord that you see, given that re-rolling the reinforcement rolls for that turn is just huge. So you're going to be playing against the City-States player, and they're going to have half to 2/3 of their stuff coming on, and we're going to see chariots probably coming back as a result of this, I'm imagining. Now, the Polymarch also has something really massive here, but probably not to the level of the Aristarch. This battlefield part of the ability here is critical. So once per game, you can automatically win the supremacy roll if you take the polymark first, which allows you to, and I didn't like this when I first read it, but let's say you've got the polymark plus your hoplites or your agema. You double march them in your final activation so that they're within range of some fragile enemy unit that needs to win the roll. And then the next turn, you auto win the roll and you charge them and you wipe them out. So to me, that seems a bit egregious, but when I thought about it a bit more, it's only once per game, and you have to entourage some polymark into one of your friendly regiments, and your opponent can see that coming. Like, it's going to be predictable, so your opponent can put something in the way. So it's not that bad. And given how powerful the Aristarch stuff is, I think that you're just going to be seeing the Aristarch all the time, not the polymark. That's my prediction. Could be wrong. There might be some awesome build out there that I haven't spotted, but the Aristarch's ability is what I personally would be taking 100% of the time. Yeah. Okay, so they've got battlefield orders here, which allows you to target friendly regiments within 12 inches of the character stand, which is a good quality of life update for them. Again, Aristarch has some really good battlefield orders from my memory. The Minotaur cows getting some buffs, so more wounds for the Tharians, Haspis coming down to points. This is great. These guys have been tweaked so many times, and still nobody's taking them. So eventually, with Parabellum's system of just like every patch to tweak them a little bit. I like the light passes. I've been the one saying, like, since the dawn of the time, make a light pass. And eventually they'll get to the point where they're just nicely balanced, and hopefully we're at that point. The Eparchos can now spam companion cavalry. You can take 1 billion of them if you want. They get brutal 1 and they get unstoppable. So that's good. I know that our buddy Dick Sander from the Conquest Eternals Discord loves taking massive regiments of these guys. It's a bit of a meme list, but these changes make that less of a meme list now. It's giving you more diversity. Still, given how powerful the Aristarch is right now, I probably wouldn't be bothering with the Eparchos at all. Clockwork hoplites have got a lot of love here. They are medium now, so you don't have to take the upgrade that makes them medium, and they are cheaper, which is nice. So all you got to do is put a mechanist in there, and then they can be affected by the battlefield orders and tactics. That's a good change. And of course, you're going to have that turn where they are within the medium band, and you're getting rerolls on your reinforcements. So these guys are going to show up a lot earlier. The Giants, points decrease, fantastic. They needed it. Selenoi, points decrease, that's fine. They weren't the most impactful regiment. And I think it's partly because they're getting rid of light scoring. So you've seen all of these positive changes to city-states, but much in the same way that we saw positive changes to 100 Kingdoms, we're also bringing it back the other way by getting rid of all the light scoring. And city-states were able to do tons of light scoring. So there are like 4 different ways here that you could light score, and all of them are being removed, which is going to result in army lists just purely consisting of all mediums and like 1 single heavy, or maybe 1 light regiment, which you ought to bring on first turn, and then just all mediums and 1 heavy, and that's what army lists will probably look like now. So you take Aristarch, Warlord in a group of, I don't know, Phalangites, you take 1 Selenoi and then 4 Chariots, and then you've got the Polymarch and the Agema, and then the Mechanist with your hoplites, and on turn 2, you're just re-rolling all of your 2s for reinforcements. You've already got your Selenoi on board, and then turn 3, you bring on your Talos automatically or whatever. So that's probably what their list will look like. Old Dominion generally getting buffed here, which is kind of a bit painful for me, because I think that Old Dominion were already pretty good. It's just they're trying to bring them up to the level where they can compete with Sorcerer Kings and Euroni. This is going to be a tough faction for 100 Kingdoms to win against, and for Spies to win against, and Dwegham until they get the update. So you're getting just pure buffs across the board for like 4 different regiments and some items there. I'm not really seeing any nerfs here at all. Everything's getting changed, and even the massive new monster that they've got, the Theocrator, that is not changed. I thought that was a pretty powerful monster, to be honest, but they are saying it's going to stay in there. So what I'm seeing here is that lists are going to generally be unchanged. They're just getting banners now. Some of the less meta stuff is being brought up, which is good. It's positive that not, for example, they're not buffing things that Old Dominion were already taking. So there's no buff to a Thanatoi or to Keres or to Legionnaires or anything like that. This or Moroi, that's pretty much staying the same. So just a few small tweaks, I think, here. Just generally making the faction a bit more internally balanced. So that's good. We weren't seeing any light scoring from Old Dominion anyway, so that's fine. I think that Old Dominion will still get shredded by Sorcerer Kings and Euroni, and will still have a good matchup against 100 Kingdoms and Spires until the rework. So that's that. Yeah, Okay, so Weaver Courts, I've had a bit of a skim read. And I think that they are reasonably well designed. Probably the important thing about Weaver Courts is that it's relatively easy to predict the way that a Conquest game pans out, in the sense that you know at least that it's turn 4 and turn 5 that are going to be their critical turns. So when you are picking your Warlord and picking the season that your Warlord will have, which determines a lot of stuff that your army can do, you are thinking about what buffs you want to have take place in turns 4 and turn 5. And there is a magical item upgrade that you can take, which allows you to keep your season going for another turn. So let's just go and have a look at that. The Voice's Silence for 30 points here. Before the start of a round supremacy phase, you may choose not to progress the cycle of seasons and go through the same season again this round. So I think that's quite an important item if you're planning around the seasonal abilities quite a lot. Let's pretend that your Warlord is the Court of Summer and you've got a lot of troops which are going to benefit from the summer strategy. That's going to mean that you start the game turn 1 summer, and then it's going to go autumn, then it's going to go winter, then it's going to go spring, and then summer comes around in turn 5. So for turn 5, you get all of the benefits, and then you voice the silence turn 6, and you keep getting the benefits. Or if you really want to start benefiting from it from turn 4 and 5, you pick the Warlord to have the supremacy, the season that comes prior to the rest of the army. So if the rest of your army is going to benefit from summer, you would have your Warlord from the season of spring, so that turn 1 is spring, and then you'd have it from the turn after, actually. So I think it'd be autumn. Yeah. God, it takes a little bit of thinking. It's a bit of a head scratcher initially, but I think you can quite easily get used to it. So let's pretend that your Warlord character is from the Court of Autumn. So that's turn 1 is autumn, turn 2 is winter, turn 3 is spring, and then turn 4 is summer, and then you've got the rest of your army's abilities mostly based around summer. And then for turn 4, you're proccing all of your abilities, you go Voice of Silence, and then for turn 5, you are summer again. And that makes the 2 most critical turns of the game the ones where you're just really benefiting from all of your abilities. So that's my first thought about Weaver Courts. As I mentioned before, they've made Weaver Courts the weakest faction initially, which makes sense. They did that for Euroni and for Sorcerer Kings and for City States and for Old Dominion, and then after a couple of patches, they super buffed them. So I imagine that's probably what's going to happen to Weaver Courts. I hope they don't make them oppressive after the first round, but in general, what I'm seeing here is just the stats of regiments and the types of bonuses that you can get from the spells and from the special abilities just aren't, critically oppressive to the level that Euroni and Sorcerer Kings are. It's cool. Like, there's a lot of flying stuff. There's some decent shooting in there, but I'm not seeing anything in the lineup that's just absolutely ball busting. So what I'm going to hopefully do is get some proxies together in TTS and play some practice games, and I'll give you guys a bit more of an overview of Weaver Courts after I've had some time to absorb how they play and what's good and what's not. We can talk about it then. But for now, that has been the overview. Hope you guys enjoyed it.